Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. #Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. Let's get to it. Welcome to Keep Hustling with my guest, Joe Soel. Joe, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Joe, I have to begin like I do with all people, men that are better than me, greater than me, that have been on this podcast, that have done what you've done. And everyone, before you continue here, I don't usually say this, but before you continue this episode, read Joe's bio. They're always in the show notes. We don't go deep into bios as part of the intro on this podcast because a lot of people are not usually interested in it. But Joe's is one that you should definitely read because you'll appreciate it. And so I must begin by saying thank you, Joe, for your service, for your sacrifice, for everything you've done for me, my family, and our country.
Thank you so much. It is the 21st anniversary of the start of the Iraq War, the war that changed my life. And it's just odd that I would be sitting here talking about it. I appreciate your thanks, but the thanks should go to those who didn't come home.
That is true. I am a born and bred New Yorker, and I was there that day. I remember it vividly, the day that snowballed into what became the Iraq War. And I guess it was more than 21 years ago. So our appreciation additionally, or as much, to those who didn't come home. So your story is an amazing one. And I think we have to begin with your upbringing, what led you to join the military, what led you to the career. Obviously, I assume that your career took a change after you served and when your service became more impacted in Iraq. But take us through that, your upbringing, and everything else like that.
Well, I was born in a very traditional Methodist home in upstate New York, actually. So I'm also a born and bred New Yorker, although we had a little more cornfields than you might have downstate. But my father was a Vietnam veteran, instilled in me a respect for country and service. And while that view has evolved over the years for me, my father's lessons are still very motivational and very impactful for me. He took care of my mother while she was ill. She was ill my entire life. She had type 1 diabetes. She was blind and in a wheelchair. Never saw me her whole life. God rest her soul, but she never saw me. And the way that my father took care of her was the foundation for me being a man. And he showed me how a man should take care of his family and take care of his responsibilities. And because of his service, I joined the Army in 2006 to try to help strike back and respond to 9/11. And over the course of my military career, things took a very interesting turn that many people didn't take. And we can get into that a little bit later. But foundationally, my inspiration was my father, who served in Vietnam.
I think it's interesting. First of all, I believe that our parents have a level of impact on us that I try to instill in my children, that most people don't view the moments that they are impacting their children as moments that are actually impacting their children. Does that make sense? Meaning, I think that other than the lessons that your father instilled in you, obviously, about service and things like that, what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is just seeing the day-to-day support that he gave to your mother was influential in its own right.
It was profoundly influential, and I wouldn't know it at the time. I would only realize it with retrospect and, of course, some serious reflection. But he cared for her like he was a full-time hospital worker and also worked a 40-hour-week job. He skipped meals so that my mother and I could eat, and he survived off cigarettes and coffee, I remember, once for 2 weeks because the medical bills and debt were so crushing. I can't say enough good things about my father. I wish that we got along better.
I hear that. I'm blessed that unfortunately, I don't want to say blessed. I had a very, very good relationship with my father, but unfortunately lost him just about a year ago. But I think that there's something there that I think that if we would have asked you at that time when that situation was going on, you may or may not have thought that it was super impactful. But now looking at it, you can't help but say that made me, as you said, the man that you are today. So I think that that's super important about interactions that anybody has with other people in their life, because we don't realize ever, I don't think, the depth of that impact.
No, no, I don't think we do. And her death had a great impact on me. It happened in 1997 when I was 10, and the way that my father carried on to raise me as a single father was also extremely impactful. So,
So you said that you joined the military in 2006, which is obviously after 2001. So I think that's an important part of the story. Did you anticipate what you were in for?
I wanted it. I wanted to deploy. I volunteered to deploy, although we didn't know where the deployment was to at the time. It was just a mobilization list, sign your name here. I signed up, and it changed the course of my life forever. It continues to affect me. I'm a little off today because, the Iraq War is in the news today, it being the 21st anniversary. So it makes me reflect on a lot of stories from Iraq, which might be good for your podcast. It's certainly front of mind for me today.
Is it ever not front of mind?
There are days when you can put it in the back of your mind, you know, on the really good days when life's going well and everything is, hunky dory. You can almost put it in the back of your mind, but it's always there. It's never out of mind for the veterans. I read an article this morning that says that it's slipping into the collective memory or the collective unconscious of the country because only 1.5 million soldiers serve there. And so many people are so disconnected from the military that the war itself has been forgotten.
I hope not.
Yeah, I certainly hope not too. That's part of the reason why I do these podcasts. And I want to keep the memory of the fallen alive. I want to keep the memory of those who served alive and our experiences alive because we can't have it be forgotten.
I think that so I am the child of an immigrant who was born in a displaced persons camp after the Holocaust. My grandparents survived, and I think that ignorance is never a good thing about what's happened in our collective histories.
Yeah.
And when people sacrifice as much as they did for us, I tell my children this all the time. I was alive, and I remember the Iraq Afghanistan war because I was not a young child. Never once in my life did I fear that they were coming and going to pull up on the Atlantic Ocean into New York City. Never once. And the reason for that is because of people like you and the veterans, and as you mentioned, specifically those who didn't come home. And so for people to be ignorant and not think about that, and to allow for parents and educators to allow that to leave our collective history, I think is a terrible thing. So thank you for spreading the message, and thank you for having the conversations, because I imagine that some of them are difficult.
Yeah, they certainly can be difficult. You might see me have a little bit of difficulty, and but they're important conversations to have so that they're not forgotten.
How long were you deployed?
I was deployed for 13 months from March 2008 to January 2009. So
It's a long time.
yeah,
I feel
that
like
was
it's a
that
long time.
was
I don't know.
that was long enough. There were people that had longer tours of 15 months, and we were lucky to not be extended, frankly. So
So I have to ask, and I imagine that your answer is going to be vastly different than most of our guests. But can you take us to the most pivotal moment in that experience?
and the most pivotal moment for me, well, there were three of them, and I'll go over them quickly in the interest of time. Uh,
Take your time.
the first was March 12th, 2008, when the 7th Sustainer Brigade lost three soldiers in a rocket attack on Kabad or Talil Air Base. That was the battalion to which our reserve unit was assigned. I was with the 962nd Ordnance Company. We were assigned to 7th Sustainer Brigade, and our first week in country, our brigade lost three soldiers and had two wounded, one so severely that he is now in a wheelchair and has irreparable brain damage, unfortunately. And the second was May 17th, 2008, when our base was hit by five 120 millimeter mortars, one striking 100 meters, 200 meters away from our position. I believe it was 198 if you want to get technical. and it destroyed a containerized housing unit. There was fire and smoke, screaming and yelling. I grabbed my CLS bag and was assigned my combat lifesaver bag. It's a medical kit. Um,
I was going to ask.
and I was assigned by our first sergeant to go look for our missing soldiers that were unaccounted for. So I ran from bunker to bunker, asking, where are these soldiers? I won't say their names because I know one of them is a very private person, and would like to forget that night. But I was shouting, I'll use a pseudonym. Where is Sergeant Taylor? Where is Sergeant Taylor? Sergeant Taylor was someone who I had deployed with from my reserve company, the 237th Maintenance Company. And he was and is a dear friend of mine. And he was my buddy, and I was looking for him because he was one of the three missing. Then I ran over probably 500 to 1,000 meters, somewhere in there, in that range, to the post exchange where a second rocket had hit, and that was the designated assembly area for, if you were out and about, that's where you were to go. There was a, like a designated bunker you were to go to if you were over in the recreation area and there was some kind of attack. I ran over there and they weren't there. And then a third rocket hit the restaurant called Six Pazzi, which was a hookah bar restaurant on base, that was run by, I believe, an Italian gentleman. And the restaurant was destroyed, smoke and fire everywhere. And our soldiers were buried in the rubble. And our first sergeant, who ran over there either with me or shortly after, because I was on the personal reconnaissance and recovery team, our first sergeant ran over and dug them out with his bare hands. They were slightly injured, but they probably merit a Purple Heart, but the paperwork wasn't processed through. So they were dug out. There were several wounded. Thankfully, no one was killed somehow, probably because of the blast wall that surrounded the restaurant. The blast wall had simply collapsed onto the restaurant. So there was a lot of fire, a lot of screaming, and I was held back by someone, I don't remember who said, "You can't go over there. There's still, active incoming. There's too many people there." So I was told not to help dig. That information I got from my first sergeant later on when he encouraged me to apply for a combat action badge that had not been awarded. It was awarded on the 18th of March 2024, just a few days ago, where, and I don't know how to feel about this, but they gave me a congressional special recognition for my service, and it they cited my courage on May 17th, 2008. And again, I don't know how to feel about that. I was just I was just looking for my friend, really. I
Do
didn't
you know what I
consider.
was doing? Do you know what most Americans were doing on that day?
No.
Not that. So
Yeah.
that's why. I can say that with confidence as a grateful citizen. That's why.
And anyway, I still don't know how to feel about that, but I appreciate your kind words. I don't mean to diminish them, but
I
I
understand. I think you deserve the support.
yeah, and I appreciate that. Anyway, they were okay, and as okay as you can be. They were struck within 10 meters. Thankfully, the blast wall collapsed on them, and the mortar didn't hit on the other side of the blast wall, which would have killed probably 100 people. So we got really lucky that night, relatively speaking. The third day is September 17th, 2008. A helicopter called Red River 44 crashed in the area of Combat or Tulil Air Base, and 7 soldiers that were on the helicopter were killed. We, as a unit, went to their dignified transfer ceremony, which you saw with those 3 soldiers in Jordan, where they carry the flag draped coffins off of the plane. Back in the mid 2000s, photography and news media were not allowed to, be there for those sorts of events. It was all very private. I believe they did that in part to not let the American people know about, the amount of casualties, but also for the privacy of the families. Of course, things have changed now, but we were there, and I'll just give you. Of course, I never mark it off in time, but it was a very poignant and moving time to see those coffins go by and know that you could have been in those coffins, perhaps the people in those coffins could have accomplished better things than you ever could, and you get to be alive and they're not. And I wrote a poem that night called Stuck in These Boots that I'll just read real quick.
I would love that.
I just can't put those men away in boxes. Sand whips by us and it feels like a cold night. It must be 65 degrees. We stand erect at perfect attention. Our shadows are carried in boxes. They are men who we might not have liked in life. We don't even know their names at present. But there we stand, our bodies aching from holding that same hand salute. The flag draped coffins, red, white, and blue, and the chaplain offers a prayer. How the heck did we get here? I feel stuck in my boots and I want out. That should be me in that box, and I know it. I can never live it down. I can't move. So I'll just stand here saluting on this tarmac in the middle of the night for the rest of my life. And that moment when they were brought off the trucks and put onto the plane is a moment you never leave. Those are the 3 moments in Iraq, those 3 dates that you never get to leave. And on the anniversary dates, it gets especially hard. So today is a very interesting day to be recording this, as it's the anniversary of the start of the Iraq War. It's almost serendipitous, but I think that if people could know the story, if they could understand even my small suffering, even the small suffering of my unit compared to what others went through, they would have a little taste of what our country gets our soldiers into. Sometimes very necessarily, sometimes not, and that's not for me to decide. That's for you to decide yourself. But those are the most difficult moments.
I have yet to be speechless on this podcast. So just give me a second.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for sharing those.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing the poem. I just want to mention here, and we will definitely link it in the show notes. But Joe was just reading from his book, and I haven't read it myself yet, but I recommend that everyone should buy it, not just to support Joe and his sacrifice, but to hear the stories, as Joe just mentioned. Two of those moments that you mentioned, and I don't want to not focus on the third one, but something struck me as you were speaking, and that is that two of them were pretty close together right when you got there.
Yeah.
What is obviously, I mean, I assume, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that these moments gain certain greater poignance when you look back at it. Because I guess when you're there, you're like, I don't know, is this every day? Is this what life's going to be like? But how do you, I'm really ignorant about some subjects, and the military is one of them. I assume you can't decide when you return home.
No.
So when you're there for a week or a month, or at this point 4 months, and two of these incredibly impactful, earth-shattering moments happen, if we're going to talk about keep hustling, how do you keep hustling through? Because I imagine it's more difficult than anything that I could ever experience. And yet you don't know if and when the end is in sight or what is going to happen further on that.
You keep hustling by putting your boots on, and you know that you have to do your duty. You don't have a choice. You have to survive. You have to go on. The mission has to continue, and you have to. You just have to put your freaking boots on. You know, we had a saying there called "lace your boots." Just lace your boots, grab your gear, let's go. I was thankful my convoy duty was uneventful, because it could have been a lot worse. But you keep hustling by putting on your damn boots, and by just putting one boot in front of the other and keep moving. That night, May 17th, 2008, I was actually preparing for a 12-hour guard shift at our ammunition supply point gate. And after I ran around trying to find those soldiers, and after our first sergeant dug them out with his bare hands, myself and another specialist whose name I won't mention for their privacy, we reported back to our living area, got in our truck, drove out, and performed a 12-hour guard shift. There was no time to sort of process or recover or go through anything. We did that after having just gotten up, and that was 1935 hours when the attack happened. And we then proceeded to go work a 12-hour shift at the guard gate.
I have to hark back to something you said, but I don't know how many people would actually just put their boots on. But I think that in your upbringing, as you mentioned, you saw your father put on his boots every day. And I think that one of the things when we talk about impact, when we talk about hustle, when we talk about keep hustling, that could get lost with some people is the impact of just doing your job, your purpose, what you know you need to be doing and should be doing in that moment. And so many people run scared of that, or so many people are just too weak to face that in a given moment. And therefore, I think those people lose out A, on life experiences, but B, on fulfilling their purpose.
Yeah.
Because if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
And if you just quit, and based on what you're saying, if you just quit, you probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
Oh, and, after the tour, because I didn't remember all these attacks. They were mixed up in my head, they were fragmented, and the VA says that part of PTSD can be memory fragmentation and memory loss. I didn't remember more than 4 snippets of the May 17th, 2008 attack. My first sergeant had to fill me in. And when I read his statement, I had a breakdown. And I called him and I said, I can't submit this to the Army. It's not, it's not real. I didn't do this. He said, yes, you did. I was there. And then I got another statement from my former commander, who's now a lieutenant colonel. And the statement said the same thing. And they hadn't talked. And I then got a statement from my squad leader who said the same thing. And they hadn't talked. And I don't remember doing it. That's why I feel, as I mentioned before about the congressional recognition, I almost feel like a fraud because I don't remember it. But if I have 3 senior leaders saying that I did it, then I did it. So that story comes from their telling of events, not my memory, because my memory is terror and running and smoke and screaming. But again, you just put on your boots. Now, when I got back from Iraq in 2009, I took off my boots, and for 10 years, I was a I was a broken alcoholic, and I didn't even know why. I didn't have the full story, and piecing together the story and ensuring that it gets out there became my hustle, even though I didn't know what hustle was at the time, and I didn't have my stuff together, and I was pretty broken at the time. I just started writing, and I kept writing, and it took me probably 15 years, but now the book is out and it's there, and my hustle now is to get the story out there. That's why I hustle, and really, it's not even so much about the story, but it's my hustle's motivated by the lessons I learned in the Army, which is just throw on your boots, do your duty. You've got to get up. You've got stuff to do. And through that brokenness, I don't give myself enough credit. And I have to realize that I continued to work, I continued to earn money, even though I was a mess. Sometimes you have to hustle while you're a mess. Hustling isn't always going to look perfect. You're not always going to have that success. You're not always going to have that, hey, I'm crushing it from next level to next level to next level. You're going to have periods of, high hills and low valleys, and sometimes those low valleys can last for a decade. But you just have to keep putting on your boots.
I actually would say that I think that hustling most of the time happens when you're not seeing that immediate success.
Yeah,
But that's what gets you to that long-term success.
yeah.
That's what gets you. Well, okay. Before I get to my last question, and again, thank you for being here. Can you please let everyone know where they can get your, even though it's going to be in the show notes, please let everyone know where they can get your book because I think it's an important one.
So the book is called The Broken Mirror of Memory, Iraq and Other Tales, and it's available on Amazon. There are 2 versions. One is straight story, only a few pictures in the back of our unit. And then there is the deluxe edition, which has illustrations and is a really fine work of art that myself and my team put together that was just really incredible. And again, they're available on Amazon. The Broken Mirror of Memory, Iraq and Other Tales.
I'm going to encourage all of our listeners, whoever's listening to this, however you're listening to this, get the deluxe version because I based on what I'm hearing. That's the one we want to read. Joe, I assume you have a lot of these, but we ask our guests to leave us with their favorite all-time or current motivational, inspirational quote and what it means to them. So I'm going to once again say thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for opening up to me and to our audience. Thank you for inspiring my hustle. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your sacrifice. I, for one, although I have nothing to do with Congress or any of those other entities, feel that you more than earned any recognition that you've received and more. So really thank you, again, on behalf of myself, my family, and our country. And with that, I will turn the floor over to you.
So my favorite inspirational quote is from my former senior drill instructor in basic training. And I had fallen asleep on guard duty, standing up. They threw a rock at the tower, and it went whack, and it woke me up while I was sleeping, standing up, because we were so exhausted. And later we were standing in formation. My senior drill sergeant looks at me and says, "Soel, what's wrong with you? It's like someone just killed your best friend. You look so discouraged." And I said, "I am. I screwed up, drill sergeant. I fell asleep." He said, "It doesn't matter if you screw up. You learn from it and you drive on." And I still have a picture with him on my desk. And every time I'm feeling low, every time I'm feeling discouraged, I just think, "So you screwed up," which of course he used more colorful language. I'm keeping it clean for the podcast. He said, "So you screwed up. Learn from it and drive on. That's all you can do. Drive on.
Dare I say, keep hustling.
Keep hustling."
Joe Soel, thank you for being here. Thank you again for sharing your story.
And thank you for having me. It's been my absolute pleasure.
This has been another episode of Keep Hustling. Remember, do well by doing good, and always keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. The listeners are the most important part of this show. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more listeners. Plus, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We have some amazing guests and topics lined up for you, and we don't want you to miss out. And finally, if you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you to continue the conversation. Thanks again for tuning in and supporting our podcast. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.